Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following program may contain images and voices of people who have died. This episode contains references to ableism, domestic abuse, gender-based harassment, and racism. It's no secret that Australia faces a critical shortage of both nurses and teachers. And it's a problem that's been going on for years and is deeply entrenched. Better pay is one way to attract more people to these jobs, but this hasn't really happened. The thing is, teaching and nursing are pink jobs, that is, jobs mostly done by women. And pink jobs have historically earned less than blue jobs done by men, say in construction and engineering. Today, that salary gap stands at $15,000 each year.
We all know the high demand for so many of the professions that women are in. Despite that demand, there isn't a supply and demand that operates in terms of what women are paid for these essential worker contributions to society.
So, if women are some of Australia's most valuable workers, why are they paid like they're valued less than men?
The system is stacked against women. Fear of destitution was the number one reason.
What should a woman be digging for? Poverty?
The expectations on women.
Gender-based commentary actually has a very chilling effect on women's confidence.
We sell our young women short.
In the history of work, men made up the majority of paid labour, while women mostly worked for free to raise children. And this only changed recently.
This is not a super long story, right? Like, women only really started flooding into the workplace properly in the 70s, really.
And when they did, they were mostly employed in low-paying jobs similar to their roles as carers or subordinate to men.
So there's a lot of laden messages that say to women that the places that we value your contribution are unpaid ones.
Historically, women have always been viewed as decorative rather than operative.
That's changed, but it hasn't changed enough.
Take computer programming, once considered an unskilled admin job done by women. As more men entered the field, wages went up and the industry became a high-paying blue one. But the opposite happens when women move into men's work. An American study discovered that wages drop once a field becomes gender balanced, even after taking things like education, experience, and ethnicity into account. And while pink industries have adapted over time to women's needs.
So they know they need to be more flexible. They know they need to offer holidays that work around school holidays.
But for women working in science, technology, engineering, or maths, their working conditions can be a challenge.
Very male-dominated sectors, including the STEM sectors, they're fairly hostile and chilly environments for women to be working in, and they're often associated with practices that we call gender harassment.
And what we see there is a lot of behaviour that maybe in the past we've thought of as sexual harassment and discrimination, but we know is actually bigger than that. And it's the stories that we get over and over again about the jokes about women doing the job, about the uniforms not fitting.
Often when women are harassed, they are either sacked, sidelined, demoted, or they choose to leave the job or leave the workforce altogether. And that contributes to the gender pay gap.
Women are more vulnerable to gender-based harassment than men because most workplaces have a power imbalance. Even in pink industries, men are more likely to occupy leadership positions than women. And when women do lead, they're still outnumbered by men. That's been the case for centuries. Take Queen Elizabeth I, for example. Throughout her 45-year reign, all members of Parliament were men, and all officers in the army, judges and lawyers, bishops, doctors, students and professors were men. And because men are the ones making decisions, gender bias is common. So it makes sense that no matter how you cut the gender pay gap, Australian women fare worse, and it starts much earlier than you might think. At university or TAFE, a woman who's studying a blue trade or profession is 4 times more likely to drop out than a man. And there's a few reasons why. Compared with women doing degrees that have an equal gender split, she's more vulnerable to isolation and harassment. and only 1 in every 7 of her professors will be female.
Young women need to be educated by people who look and sound like them, people who do not treat them differently because they are a woman.
Even if she doesn't drop out, she'll still face challenges in competing for a job that her male counterparts won't.
The barriers, I would say, are the networks. We like to work with people who are similar to us. If you were to look at Anglo-Saxon men in their 50s and 60s, and me, for example, I'm not sure if there's an overlap.
When she does get hired, she'll face a pay gap.
So a young woman who is 20 is going to enter the workforce earning about 14% less than her male counterpart. That's a fact. She's going to earn less.
Having a female body is always a space of judgment. We still consider womanhood or having a woman in the workplace as a potential risk of absenteeism.
And this is a barrier to better pay or promotions, which is made worse by money anxieties.
Women are not as good at asking for things in the workplace, like pay rises and promotions.
One of the particularly bad gender constructs for girls and women is the so-called good girl syndrome. Sit there nicely and quietly, be the glue in others' conversations and never talk about the nasty business of money. That's a good girl.
There are lots of really pejorative terms like gold digger. What does that mean? So what should a woman be digging for? Poverty?
She'll also be penalised for her appearance.
We're expected to appear in a certain way to be workplace ready, but if we go too far, we're not seen as being as professional as some of our male colleagues.
I know I've definitely been pigeonholed into talking about body image or appearance or beauty, but young girls, that's how they understand their worth in the world, right? Based on how they look.
And looking different has a snowball effect on the bias she already faces.
I was once asked if I've ever felt discriminated against because I'm a woman. And my initial response to that was no. Is it because the fact that I have a disability overpowers my identity as a woman?
I always have to preface this by saying it is with dry humour that, you know, you've made it as a trans woman when you don't get discriminated against for being trans, you face discrimination for identifying as a woman.
I experienced a lot of different treatment when I transitioned from presenting as a woman in society to presenting as a man. And the language that people use around my behaviour is really different. So I'm called, you know, professional and competent or confident rather than bossy and emotional or dramatic.
But how we value women's work, it affects all of us.
Participation of women in all walks of life is actually fundamentally important from a social equity perspective, but also from a productivity and participation perspective.
You look at which countries have done the best under COVID, and there's a very high propensity of female leadership.
But the roles prescribed to women are still an impediment in top jobs.
Extreme criticism based on gender, based on appearance, based on, you know, gender traits and characteristics, that will have a deterrent effect on women's full participation.
Take Julia Gillard, for example. As Australia's first female Prime Minister, the media focused on anything that pointed to her appearance. Her hair, her clothing, her shoes, and yet...
I think it was still the most successful parliament ever in terms of the amount of stuff it got done. You didn't hear that or learn that in the media. It just wasn't reported on.
And all of this dampens the productivity of powerful women. During the 2016 American election campaign, Hillary Clinton spent 25 days in hair and makeup. And efforts to increase the representation of women in leadership roles are still subject to the Elizabeth effect.
I decided to obtain the data for the ASX 200, and what I found was that the two most common first names for female directors are Susan and Elizabeth.
Every time we ask for female representation, it so happens that it is the same female.
In 2020, women were 1.5 times more likely than men to sit on multiple company boards.
And that can be a lot more damaging for people over time and may actually impact their willingness to accept opportunities because they don't want to be seen as the token anything. They just want the playing field to be so level that nobody even questions whether or not you should have been chosen for an opportunity.
If the same women are on multiple boards, then there actually is a concentration of risk as opposed to a diversification.
And women's work being worth less contributes to women feeling worthless.
I think one of the consequences of being in a society that doesn't value you as an Aboriginal woman is that you don't tend to value yourself. We don't think we deserve to be paid as much. We don't think we deserve to be paid for our labour. We think we should do things for free.
I have found it hard the last couple of years since acquiring a whole number of new disabilities. And while I've had incredibly supportive bosses who've made allowances for me, I still use language like that, right? I still say allowances. I still consider it a kindness instead of seeing it as my right as a worker.
In some circumstances, diminished self-esteem and negative money beliefs manifest in relationships.
So, domestic violence relationships often start quite young. The biggest risk age group is 16 to 19. Surveys differ, but really it's about 90 to 95% of domestic abuse scenarios include financial abuse. So it is actually more common to domestic abuse than physical violence.
And when women start dating someone, they sometimes stop valuing their financial independence.
Well, what about the women who like to have the men pay for the meal on the first date, or they like to have, men buy them things? So there's just no getting around the fact that if you're not financially independent, you're vulnerable. So what makes a woman more or less vulnerable to domestic abuse? Number one is really how much financial independence she has and how much she can maintain over the life of the relationship.
So, what can be done to help move women towards financial independence? Take company boards, for example, where a concentration of women means others might miss out.
There needs to be a wider net cast when you're recruiting.
Appointing women as board observers can also help.
Women aren't put on boards because they don't have the experience, but it becomes this vicious circle of if you don't have the experience, then you're unable to have the opportunity.
The good thing is that I think a lot of men understand and appreciate the criticality of allowing or empowering women. They can be incredible agents of change and positive change.
In 2015, tech company Salesforce began taking active steps to fix the gender pay gap within its organisation and has so far spent more than $12 million adjusting pay across all employees. And while movements like Me Too have helped to make workplaces safer,
we need to view sexual harassment and assault as a workplace health and safety issue. If there was a gas leak in a room, you wouldn't have your boss saying, oh look, just go back in there and keep working with the gas leak, it'll be fine, I'll sort it out over here. We need to get everyone out of that room, out of the unsafe and toxic workplace and fix it.
Fact is,
all of these truth-telling movements are really waking us up to the lies that we've been living with and we've been habituated to believe.
And for women, that means confronting old gender norms like beauty. In Tracy Spicer's TEDx talk, she suggests women should first tally the amount of time spent grooming. Second, think about what else could be done in that time instead.
And the third step is to work out what you can live without.
It's a rethink that Turia Pitt is familiar with.
My life hasn't turned out the way I had anticipated. Then I got trapped by a fire, received burns to 65% of my body. With my life, I really want to make sure that I'm living it to the best of my ability. If I start my day off by not looking at my phone, by practicing gratitude, by being mindful with my family, well then I feel better about myself. I feel more energised.
It's a mindfulness women can also apply to how they spend their money.
1 in 3 dollars in circulation in the Australian economy belongs to a millennial. Use your dollar bills, your hard-earned dollar bills, to vote for the things that are important to you.
I've been looking at the companies that contribute to reducing carbon emissions. We emit 43 billion tonnes every year of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's a huge market that we can address.
We have a very talented female labour force, and they need to start to really exercise their power a little better and walk away from employers who are not totally there for them.
I think the challenge for many Aboriginal women is that so much of society tells them they're not worth anything. So my main message to Aboriginal women watching this, especially young Aboriginal women, is don't forget your power. We carry the blood and DNA of all our female ancestors in us when we walk this earth. We follow in their footsteps. So we honour them when we use that power. We honour them.
But even in a world where women are more highly valued, most will still face a big career hurdle. And that's when they take time off work to have babies. Men are traditionally seen as the breadwinners and expected to work full-time, which just exacerbates the gender pay gap.
And there are all these kind of unwritten triggers and signposts that really regulate men's behaviour.
Even if men want to spend more time with their children, they're twice as likely to have their requests for flexible work rejected than women. So, if we no longer think of child rearing and caring as women's work, what can we change about who does it?